Ladies and gentlemen, I come bearing great news because it appears as if Nvidia are actually listening to us, and if rumors are to be believed, they're actually prepping some brand new super series of graphics cards that will come packing more VRAM, which finally means you can get decent performance with a capacity of VRAM that isn't going to run out in about 5 minutes. Because you see, we now have some reliable leakers dropping new information on not one, not two, but 3 new super graphics cards: the RTX 5070 Super, the RTX 5070 Ti Super, and the RTX 5080 Super. And usually these cards kind of feel almost like a bit of a stopgap, so they're a marketing technique from Nvidia to make an older product sound newer than it is. We don't often see like huge changes, but this time around, whilst that is true on one hand, on the other it's completely not, because as we know, the VRAM capacities on Nvidia's graphics cards didn't really go up much on this generation versus the 40 series, so they're almost rectifying their own mistake here. I mean, granted, whether you like it or not, it doesn't look as if AMD and Intel graphics cards are going to start outselling Nvidia's anytime soon, but they do need to be careful not to fall behind, because I can't think of a time when Nvidia's enthusiast gaming cred has actually been this low, with arguably poor gen-on-gen improvements, driver issues, high pricing, and universally panned capacities of VRAM. Today then perhaps marks the start of the comeback, with 3 GPUs that I've got to say do have me cautiously optimistic. And to kick things off, let's start with the top end, the RTX 5080 Super. Now, like most of the super cards over the years, don't go expecting a brand new GPU with 50% performance gains, as the CUDA count, SM, RT, and Tensor cores are essentially all of the same as the normal 5080, though we should see performance gains from increased memory speed, power, and clock speeds. And don't get me wrong, I'm hardly a genius for working this out, but when we actually started doing some overclocking tests with the original 5080, we saw that it had so much potential inside it. I think I got mine above 3100 megahertz, which was nuts, way up from the base and boost clocks of this thing, that it means that Nvidia really can give you some extra performance out the box just by tweaking the specifications of what the clock speeds are going to be at this, which is definitely cheating, because as I say, you can overclock this card yourself, and other than the VRAM boost, you'll still be able to get a decent performance increase. But this is one of the ways I think Nvidia will be able to give you some out-of-the-box performance without fundamentally changing the GPU itself. And obviously, yes, everything here is speculation. We've got rumors as well as my insight, but I would say that probably a clock speed increase getting on for 3000 megahertz or so seems relatively likely, bearing in mind that you do have the headroom in this card. But then there is also an increase in the amount of power that this is going to use too, around about 15% more, or 55 watts. And whilst some of this is definitely going to go towards running the extra VRAM, I'd like to think that some of this is going to be allocated to having higher clock speeds to maintain them stably and thus give you extra FPS. But let's jump into what is definitely the most important bit, right? That extra VRAM. And the reason that we are getting these super ranges is not only because, frankly, I think it's required, but because we now have some new memory modules, which doesn't always sound that sexy, but it does, I think, when it comes to graphics cards, because we're going from 2 gigabyte modules to 3 gigabyte modules. So if you imagine you've got your board where you've got all the different bits of memory, they're literally just swapping those ones out. So the quantity of the modules is the same, but the capacity of those is 50% more. So you can do the maths. All of these new supercards have 50% more VRAM, with the 5080 going from 16 to 24 gigabytes, which is pretty tasty. Now, many, if not most of us, will question why this wasn't implemented in the first place, but it does fundamentally fix one of the biggest issues that we do have with the RTX 5080. And it's not that 16 gigabytes of VRAM isn't enough for today, it's that if you're spending likely over £1,000 of dollars on a graphics card, we all think it should net you something that you can enjoy for years to come without much compromise. And 16 gigabytes of VRAM was just always on the edge of justifiable for this sort of cash. 24 gigabytes of VRAM though, this is arguably a completely different kettle of fish, as regardless of whether it's for work or play, you can lean into your purchase knowing that when it comes to VRAM at least, you are future-proofing yourself for years to come. Now, I've got to say that this is probably going to be the main change here. As I say, don't go expecting crazy performance differences. If I was a betting man, I'd say it's probably between 5 and 10% more, but a lot of this is going to come potentially from an overclock that you could do already on your existing 5080. So it's not really going to be one, well, it's almost certainly not going to be one for any existing 50 series owner, maybe not even 40 series, but certainly 30 series and earlier is definitely going to make these cards a whole lot more enticing. So yeah, absolutely nothing fundamentally different. It's all about extracting as much from this generation as they can, which as we know is kind of similar to 40 series anyway, so plenty of jokes and things in there that you can make. But as far as I'm concerned, if they're the same price and you have much larger VRAM capacities, then this is only obviously a good thing because it means we get more for our money essentially, and as I say, it's going to make them a lot more future-proof. Pricing is going to be an interesting one because obviously nothing's been announced, these products haven't been announced, these are all rumours, and usually the price on the Supers stays the same, but as they are going from 2 gig to 3 gig memory modules, not 100% sure. It's difficult to say because if you're in Europe at the moment, then most of these cards are actually available for under the RRP. But if you're in the States, it's pretty much the opposite, right? It is very difficult to get hold of these cards at the right price. But whether that is down to availability or whether that is just logistics with the US, it's very hard to say. So I would still wager that the prices on these will be the same, but it all comes down to tariffs and things as well. I think if there's one particular tariff that just sticks and everyone knows that that's not going to change, they may well announce a different price that's slightly higher that takes that into account. But if it's still a little bit up in the air, they're probably going to be keeping the prices the same. But as there are new memory modules in this, if the prices of those modules for whatever reason gets very expensive or it's very different to the existing ones that they're using, then you might find like a small price increase of like $20, $30 or pounds or so. But we don't know. We're going to have to wait till nearer the time. So that's your 5080 Super, but moving down the stack to what is usually my pick, we have the 70 Ti class, now coming in its own 5070 Ti Super flavour. And this is very interesting to me, as the 5070 Ti arguably had the correct amount of VRAM for what it was trying to do in the right price point, with 16 gigabytes of memory. But this time NVIDIA are taking no chances whatsoever and are also supposedly upgrading this to 24 gigabytes using those same 3 gigabyte memory modules. Which really is kind of funny when you think about it, because NVIDIA have made their own bed here. They're having to upgrade this card that they probably wouldn't want to otherwise, because think what would happen if they didn't. You'd have these 2 new super cards sitting around it with more VRAM, and then you'd even have a card that costs almost half the amount, the 5060 Ti, in that 16 gig flavor, with 16 gigabytes of VRAM. So it would make this card look a little bit bad, wouldn't it? Which is why I think they're also boosting the VRAM capacity. In terms of the raw specifications, it's a very similar deal to what we have with the 5080 Super. There's no changes to cores, shader, RT, tensor. It's the same 192-bit memory bus, but now we have 24 gigabytes of GDDR7 memory. As with the 5080 Super, the power also looks to be increasing by around about 50 watts, up to 350 now, and clock speeds, whilst unknown, may well see a boost too. But all in all, once again, probably anywhere between 0 to 10% performance boost, with larger gains when it comes to VRAM bound scenarios. Now, in terms of that all-important pricing information, once again, wouldn't expect to see any drastic changes. It's got more memory inside it, so they could potentially increase the price by $20, $30, maybe even $50 or so. But it all comes down to how well these cards are selling, which once again, in the UK and in Europe, I think it's doing anywhere from meh to okay, certainly not exceptional. But if you were to only look at the US, you might think differently, right? So it's hard to judge, but ultimately it all comes down to, as I say, how well they're selling and how much NVIDIA are buying these new memory modules for. Pressing on though to our third and final card, we have the RTX 5070 Super, the most needed card of the lot by far. And interestingly, it does look as if we're getting a slight CUDA core boost here, going from 6144 to 6400, though potentially the same clock speed, though that of course is still very much up in the air, subject to change, and of course you're welcome to overclock this yourself. Unlike its bigger brothers though, the power changes here are fairly minimal, only a 25 watt increase up to 275 watts, which may well mean that this is just for the extra VRAM and not for the extra performance, but it might also have something to do with maybe the companies not wanting to fundamentally change their coolers. If you produce too much heat, they'd have to redesign all of these and it would be a very expensive relaunch. Difficult to say, but obviously the biggest change here is going to be with that VRAM capacity going from 12 gigabytes to 18. Thank you. It was required. Now, I'm definitely not one to mince my words, but I think it's fair to say that the 5070 was arguably a pretty stupid release, really, because it is absolutely fine in most scenarios. The performance of it, it's not cutting edge, but it's more than most people actually need. But when NVIDIA want to push RTX and push ray tracing, but then in titles like Indiana Jones, it was so easy to break under high VRAM load, it just made the whole thing really, really disappointing, especially when the card actually had enough grunt to otherwise manage those settings. Oh, and again, this is very much just like the cleanup operation, isn't it, for NVIDIA? Fixing their own mistake. They've gone into the nightclub, they've chucked beer on the floor and then complained, that the floor was sticky essentially, and yet the cleaners are the ones that obviously have to sort the problem out. Not sure that analogy works, but you get the idea really. I think a 5070, even if it didn't have drastically more performance at the same price with 18 gigabytes of VRAM, that is a lot more enticing because the actual performance of the card in isolation isn't bad, but again, it's still not fundamentally different to a 40 series. We need to go back to like the 3080 really before we've saw like huge gains, really impressive and really like desirable products that everyone like kind of lost their crap really and really wanted to get one. It's just a shame. So Super is definitely going to be exciting if you haven't bought into 50 series yet, especially if you're coming from 30. But if you're on 40 series or 50 series, Super's not really for you essentially. They're just for people that are upgrading from older generations, which I think is a shame because there's almost certainly more Nvidia could do. But hey ho, this is just the situation that we're in. But it's all about that pricing. As long as it is the same, we're getting better products with more VRAM, I'm okay with that. But if you're expecting, as I say, massive gains year on year, you probably are going to be disappointed with Super really. In terms of availability as well, rumors at the moment point it towards CES 2026. And that may well be true, but again, I think it all comes down to sales data because they typically sell more of these in the winter for the holiday season. But if in the run up to that, they're finding that they're not actually selling as many cards as that they normally would for that time of year, they may well pull it forward and maybe launch these in like October, November to really get that holiday sale. But otherwise, obviously, they want to carry the sales into the new year, really. So that's what we're looking at. The question goes out to you on this. Is this exciting? Or is this literally just, as I say, Nvidia cleaning up the beer they spilt on the floor? I'd absolutely love to hear your thoughts on this. Let us know down in the comment section below. Smash the like button if you've enjoyed this. Get yourself subscribed for more PC builds and more news about these nearer the time and full reviews. But thank you so much for watching. We will catch you in the next one.